So in this first episode, we're going to just give you a little introduction to what cloud computing is, and it's a really overused term. Cloud computing in its earnest probably started 20 years ago, and the IT industry got very excited about it to the extent that they called everything the cloud. So we're now in a society where everyone, when you refer to cloud, you're not referring to the things that are in the sky, but you're referring to IT terms, which is really quite annoying. And I think it's important to define what we mean by cloud computing. At a really high level, cloud computing is the ability to buy technology in a consumption model. So if you think like any utilities, the way you buy electricity and stuff like that, it's just buying access to IT through a pay-as-you-go type service. But where it gets confusing is some people launched cloud services which are actually just leases, and the real benefit of cloud computing is you're getting access to paying for what you use and you're minimizing your commitment. And so in that context, being on a cloud computing platform is a really good thing if your workloads or your requirements are quite variable and you can control when they are on and off. So cloud computing, as its simplest form, is utility-based computing. In fact, when it started, I think IBM started calling it utility computing. Other people called it as-a-service computing. All those things, pretty much mean cloud computing. And if you think about it at its really core level, for those of you who watched the first bit of our video series, computing can be defined in sort of three main chunks. You've got hardware, software, and services. Cloud computing tends to combine those three things. So you're buying the whole of the IT stack, if you like, as a service. And so in that context, you probably are minimizing the amount of money you're spending on resources and people and hardware infrastructure, because you can share that infrastructure across multiple clients. And where cloud computing gets really interesting is that sharing means that, the people who provide cloud computing, for instance, Microsoft or Amazon, they have to be quite clever about how they design their infrastructure to support a big scalable platform. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. The three main sort of types of cloud computing are, again, as I always refer to them, in a bit of a stack. At the bottom, you've got infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, IaaS. And that infrastructure as a service is effectively buying all the bits of a piece of hardware as a service. So you are buying CPUs and memory and disk, for those of you who remember me going through that in earlier sequences. So when you're buying IaaS, you're really just buying the core, what they call compute capacity, which is the foundation for all types of cloud computing in its entirety. And that's probably the biggest area of revenue from a cloud computing industry perspective, and it's also the sort of most commoditized now. You can buy compute, hang on, so just sorting some waves out. We can buy compute, and it's pretty much the same no matter where you buy it, give or take a few nuances which we'll discuss later on. So that's IaaS. The next layer up is what they call platform as a service, or PaaS, P-A-A-S. Now that is a bit more complicated. Effectively what you're buying is you're buying the IaaS, the foundation layer at the bottom, but you're also buying common components that sit on that. So that would be things like databases, or in some cases some security software, or other things that are common to multiple cloud requirements, but can be used and again shared across multiple clients. So in that context, PaaS is actually not a bad layer to focus on. IaaS is commoditized, but PaaS has quite a lot of different components to it, and that's probably more difficult to buy. And I think if you remember in some of our previous videos, we talked about the complexities of buying databases and why you need to make sure you understand how those databases work properly. So PaaS is probably the most complex cloud platform to buy, and as a result, it's not that common. In terms of market share and revenues, it's probably not as big as IaaS. It's certainly not as big as SaaS. And that brings me on to the next one, which is software as a service, or SaaS. Now, probably unbeknown to most people, we're all using SaaS all day, every day, and that ranges from things like Facebook that is a SaaS platform, cloud platform. That ranges for things like Netflix. That is a SaaS cloud platform. And they all do different things. And because they're software focused, they're primarily focused on delivering a function or a business process or something like that at the application level. So if you think about it again as a stack, like I always do, IaaS is at the bottom, PaaS at the next layer up, SaaS is the top layer. And most businesses are dabbling with IaaS, or they've got into IaaS. A few businesses are dabbling with PaaS. Pretty much every business is buying SaaS. And so things like Office 365, if you're a procurement buyer, is a SaaS platform. And that is basically an application like Excel or PowerPoint, but that is delivered from the cloud, and therefore it is a software as a service platform. And those sort of types of services are common across pretty much all of the industry. If you're familiar with those three terms, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, you'll be able to converse confidently in front of other parties. Now, you think about what the benefits are in terms of cloud computing. So I'll speed up a bit because we're out the harbour. Where cloud computing plays best is if you are needing to scale your services quickly and switch them off quickly, or if you've got big variable workloads. It's not quite as simple as that, but that's probably the easiest way to understand it. And if you think about it in the context of the difference between buying a car and getting an Uber. Uber is a SaaS platform, just for information. So you buy yourself a car, it costs you £10,000. That car will sit on your drive. You won't use it much, but when you do use it, it costs you nothing in your head because you've bought an asset and it's depreciating over a period of time, and that is a fixed cost that you've got control over. You pay for the fuel on a consumption basis, but fundamentally you've bought a big asset. If you get an Uber, you're paying X amount per mile. And that is variable based on the number of other people who are using that Uber or using Uber as a platform at the time. So Uber is the cloud equivalent to the car, which is you buying some hardware. And this is why, as a procurement professional, you really do need to think about, before you get into cloud, you need to think about what it is that you are buying and whether it's sensible to buy as a cloud or whether it's sensible to buy as a piece of hardware. Because in some cases, buying your own hardware and software and owning it and depreciating over 5 years is very sensible. But the primary benefit of the cloud is this. It's basically, if you've got a very variable workload, i.e. your computers are spinning up and spinning down very quickly, it's sensible to look at the cloud. A good example of that would be if you're an online retailer and you have peak seasons, you are likely to want to scale up and scale down when it's Christmas or whether it's Black Friday sales. You're just paying for what you use. Rather than buying a big piece of hardware that can cope for peak, the cloud provider has bought that, you just buy it on an on-demand basis. So that's the main benefit of the cloud. The risks of the cloud, we'll go into in a little bit more detail, but the main risk actually is cost. If you are putting a piece of a workload on the cloud that isn't very variable, you will pay through the nose for it. And that is something you really need to think about as procurement professionals, because it's quite risky. There are other risks associated with reliance on a particular provider, where the data centers are and where your data is stored. We're relying on the internet, all these sorts of things, but fundamentally cost is probably the one that most people worry about. And so, that is the cloud at its higher level. It's a variable-based, consumption-based way of buying IT. It's a simple way of getting into IT, but comes with risks. And it's in three main layers: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Most people are in IaaS, and we'll explain a bit more about that in the next episode.